Have you ever met someone and felt an immediate, inexplicable dislike? Not a disagreement or even a personality clash. It feels like something deeper than that, something that already feels personal, even though they have not really done anything to earn it. You might tell yourself it is their arrogance, or their laziness, or maybe just the way they carry themselves. Your mind builds a case quickly, and the conclusion feels obvious. But Jung had a different explanation. He called it the shadow, the part of your psyche that holds everything you have refused to acknowledge about yourself. Not the version of you that you present to the world, but the one you have pushed out of view. It starts early. You learn which parts of you are acceptable and which ones are not. Anger gets pushed down, neediness gets hidden, and the desire for attention becomes something to feel ashamed of. None of those traits actually disappear. They simply move out of sight. And then, eventually, you meet someone who embodies exactly what you buried. That is when the reaction starts to feel stronger than it should. A colleague leaves work right on time, and for some reason it irritates you more than it makes sense. Someone dominates a conversation at a party, and you feel an immediate dislike that seems disproportionate to what actually happened. On the surface, it looks like you are reacting to them, but the reaction is coming from somewhere else. Think about what actually happens in that moment. Someone does something ordinary. They speak confidently, set a boundary, or take credit for something. And somewhere in your body, before your mind has even processed it, there's a response, a tightening, a quiet hostility that feels completely rational because your mind immediately supplies the reasons. That speed matters because real assessments of people usually take time. They require observation, context, and repeated exposure. What happens instantly is not an assessment, it is a recognition. Your nervous system encounters something familiar and reacted before you had a chance to examine why. Jung spent years documenting this in his patients and eventually in himself. He found that the traits people reacted to most strongly were almost never random. They followed a pattern, and that pattern, when traced back far enough, almost always led to something the person had been taught to suppress in themselves. He called this projection. Instead of recognizing a disowned trait in yourself, you experience it externally. You do not register it as yours. You experience it as theirs. And because it has been rejected internally, it feels amplified, distorted, and almost unbearable to be around. That intensity is the clue. It is not proof that they are the problem. It is a sign that something in them is touching something in you that has not been acknowledged yet. And it is not always negative. Sometimes what you cannot stand in someone else is their confidence, their freedom, or the ease with which they move through situations that would cost you something. Jung referred to this as the golden shadow, the parts of yourself you suppressed not because they were bad, but because you were taught they were too much. Either way, the reaction points in the same direction. There is something there, and at some point, you learn to set it aside. Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If you pay attention, you start to notice something else. It is not just one person, it is a pattern. Different faces, different situations, but the same reaction keeps surfacing, the same irritation, the same judgment, and that quiet certainty that this time it is justified. After a while, it stops feeling random and starts feeling familiar, not in a way that is obvious, but in a way that lingers. The familiarity does not come from the situation itself, it comes from something underneath it. The shadow does not disappear because you ignore it. It does not fade because you explain it away. If anything, it becomes more persistent. It waits, and it keeps finding ways to show itself. Through other people, through the situations you keep ending up in, through the traits you keep noticing and reacting to again and again, until you see it, or until it keeps repeating. Most people never recognize what is happening. They stay focused on the other person. They explain it, justify it, and reinforce it. Over time, that reaction becomes part of how they move through the world. Certain types of people start to feel predictable, irritating, difficult to be around. The problem always seems to exist somewhere outside of them. But the pattern does not go away, it adapts. It shows up in new environments, new relationships, new situations. Each time it feels different on the surface, but underneath it carries the same emotional weight, the same reaction, the same sense of certainty. And because it feels consistent, it feels true. That is how something internal begins to look like reality. You start organizing your life around it, avoiding certain people, distrusting certain behaviors, and repeating the same conflicts in slightly different forms. And without realizing it, you build a world that keeps reflecting the same thing back to you, not because the world is structured that way, but because something in you has not been seen clearly yet. What makes this difficult is that projection rarely feels like projection while it is happening. It feels like insight, like accuracy, like you are finally seeing someone clearly, maybe more clearly than anyone else does. That is why people defend these reactions so strongly. To question them would mean questioning the story your mind built to protect you, and most people would rather keep the story than examine what is underneath it. That is part of what makes the shadow so persuasive. It does not arrive as a confession, it arrives as certainty. You do not feel confused, you feel convinced. You feel as though you have measured the other person correctly and reached the obvious conclusion. But certainty is not always truth. Sometimes it is just emotional familiarity wearing the mask of truth. And that is where the shadow becomes dangerous, not because it makes you evil, and not because it turns you into someone else, but because it can quietly shape your choices while convincing you that you are simply being realistic. It can determine who you trust, who you avoid, who you resent, and who you admire from a distance while still judging them. It can even shape the roles you take on in your own life, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who never asks for too much, the one who stays controlled while quietly resenting people who seem free. That is the deeper cost. The shadow does not only distort how you see other people, it distorts the life you allow yourself to have. Every trait you reject too completely has a way of returning, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through longing. You resent it in one person and envy it in another. You criticize it publicly and wish for it privately. And until you notice that contradiction, it keeps power over you. You might start to notice that the same type of person keeps appearing in your life. Different names, different faces, but the same dynamic, the same tension, the same outcome. At first it feels like coincidence, then it begins to look more like a pattern. Eventually, if you are honest about it, it starts to feel like something you are participating in. Jung did not see this as a flaw, he saw it as an invitation, not to become what you rejected, but to recognize that it was never fully gone. The anger you buried, the need you denied, the version of you that wanted more, or wanted attention, or wanted rest, none of it disappeared. It simply changed where you look for it. Instead of recognizing it internally, you encounter it externally, and when you do, it does not feel neutral. It feels charged, personal, sometimes even threatening. That is why the reaction can feel so immediate and so certain. The uncomfortable part is that the people who trigger you most may be showing you more about yourself than the people who make you feel comfortable. Comfort rarely exposes anything. Conflict does, especially the kind that feels immediate, repetitive, and strangely familiar. That kind of reaction is not random. It is a signal, not always about the other person, sometimes about the part of you that has been left in the dark for so long that the only way it can get your attention is by appearing in someone else. The next time someone triggers you, really triggers you, pause for a moment before you explain it, before you justify it, before you build the case, because the intensity you feel might not be about them at all. It might be the part of you that you learned not to be, trying to be seen.